what is going on with this baby who is touching the monkey and being licked by a dog. We'll have to ask Diego.
The modern country of Mexico has a complex identity that includes great indigenous empires, Spanish conquistadores, complex racial identities, liberal reformers, rural campesinos, wealthy landowners, and urban intellectuals. Throughout its conquest, independence, and 20th century revolution, Mexican leaders have struggled to take all of those sometimes antagonistic forces and fit them under one nation. The 1920s and 30s was a pivotal moment for the creation of a unifying national identity, and the government often used public art to convey its vision. Diego Rivera is probably the most well-known of these artists, and his murals are historical artifacts all on their own, showing both the government's messaging and Rivera's own personal interpretation of Mexico's past and future.
Emily, what do you know about Diego Rivera?
I know that he was an artist, lived in Mexico City, was married to Frida Kahlo, and that's pretty much all I know about him.
I bet you know what kind of art.
He did murals.
Great.
Okay.
Well, that's the basics.
Great.
Video over. No, you're exactly right. So he's probably the most famous muralist, I would say, in the world. Like, if you ask people to name, like, he might be the only one that most people could name. He's definitely a very famous artist from Mexico, partly for his own murals and partly for his relationship with Frida Kahlo.
Had many affairs too, right?
He had many wives. He and Frida, he was
Had
like
many
42 and Frida was 22 and his student. They got married and then divorced and then married again later the year they got divorced. So there's a lot of stuff going on. We know that Frida Kahlo was also having a relationship with
Trotsky.
Leon Trotsky, more like Leon
Hotsky.
while they were with Diego Rivera. So complicated man, but I want to focus on his art today and murals as like public art and protest. So great, I have my little notes. Shout out this journal I got in the market yesterday. So I want to give you some context, right? We had the Mexican Revolution of 1910. It's sort of confusing because the Mexican independence movement was in 1810. And then there was a basically nationalist revolution in 1910 to overthrow a dictator known as Porfirio Diaz. And this period of time that he ruled off and on from 1876 to 1911, like almost 40 years.
Yeah.
It's called the Porfiriato.
Okay.
Do you know anything about Porfirio Diaz?
I know that he got his start in the military and worked his way up to becoming some very important politician.
Yeah, so during this period of like the reforms and the French intervention of what, the 1850s and 60s, 1850s and 60s, he's rising up through the military. He fights at the very famous Battle of Puebla, which is why we celebrate
Cinco de Mayo.
Cinco de Mayo. And then he kind of emerges, he almost does like a Napoleon. He emerges out of the military and then he starts to assume control, sometimes directly or indirectly. And what he wants to do is he wants to steer Mexico towards the United States. Basically, Benito Juarez, more a liberal reformer who wants it to be like Mexico for the Mexicans, basically. And Porfirio Diaz says, no, we need to ally ourselves very closely and financially with the United States.
Okay.
And so what that means is that during this Porfiriato, there's a ton of economic growth. Like if you look at Mexico, a ton of economic growth, but most of that is coming because of outside foreign investment.
Okay.
And basically selling off of like resources and lands to like the highest bidder. So if you are kind of like a Mexican nationalist, you're pretty angry. And probably that wealth is not making its way down to you.
Right.
So by 1910, there are many different groups who want to get rid of Porfirio Diaz. There are indigenous people that are going to be led by Emiliano Zapata who want like indigenous communal land back. There are going to be business interests who maybe just like want more opportunities to go outside of just working with the United States. There are going to be democratic activists who want democracy.
Everyone hates Porfirio Diaz.
Yeah, it's just like everyone has a reason to want him gone, but no one agrees.
No one's united.
No one agrees on what should happen afterwards. So the Mexican Revolution of 1910 is fairly simple. We topple Porfirio Diaz, and then it's kind of chaos for 10 years of almost like a civil war, which we see a lot after revolutions, of discussing what Mexico should become. And so we settle in around 1920. We have a political party known as the PRI, the Partido Revolucionario, the Revolutionary Party, that basically says we are going to be the sort of coalition that's going to create this new Mexican government. And one of the things that they spend the 1920s and 30s on is solidifying the Mexican national identity and figuring out like how can we get us all on the same page that we are all Mexican, indigenous, Spanish descent, Black, any of those groups, and we're all under our government that we're in charge of.
Right.
Why is that interesting or fun to you?
Well, I think that if you need, you need that like internal support in order to, you need that internal support in order to justify your new government. But I also love the idea of intentionally trying to cultivate this idea of what it means to be Mexican.
Yes. It's really interesting to study historically because it's a moment where they're literally having these conversations.
Right.
A lot of times we talk about like, oh, people were wondering what it meant to be. And it's like, it's sort of a metaphor.
Mhm.
But this, they were literally like, no, how should we write the history book?
Yes.
So they're writing like national history books. How should we explain the conquest? How should we explain these things?
Yeah.
And so one of the things that the Minister of Public Education does is he collaborates between the government and artists to talk about how are we going to communicate this new vision of Mexico to the public.
Mhm.
And so that's where we get a lot of money for public art, and Diego Rivera becomes kind of the most famous leader of that movement.
I love that.
Yeah. And Diego Rivera is going to be really interesting. We'll talk about him more inside, because he also has a very specific view for what he thinks Mexico should be. And so he's able to get a lot of money from the government, and he's also able, and his ideas align mostly with the government, but he also is able, he's like a sneaky little guy.
Yeah. A little subversive.
A little subversive. He's able to like slip in some stuff that is going to like communicate to the public that is maybe not exactly what the government wanted.
When you were first saying that, I was thinking that he was going to do something that is like not directly front and center on the mural, but like something in like the background of the mural or the foreground, like very small. That's like, but here's what I want.
His murals are like a Where's Waldo.
Woo!
But exactly, there's so many things to notice, and sometimes like even the people that commissioned the murals were like, oh, I didn't notice that until later.
A great example of Diego Rivera's nationalistic art is his work, The History of Mexico, also called The Epic of the Mexican People. Unfortunately, the National Palace was closed when we visited, but usually you can wander in and find this massive mural spanning the stairwell that walks viewers throughout his history of Mexico. On the north wall, we see depictions of the Mexica or Aztec civilization before walking along the chaotic west wall. In the center, Rivera emphasizes the key moments in Mexico's modern creation: the Spanish conquest, 1810 War of Independence, and the 1910 Revolution. These are flanked by two opposing political eras, Juárez's Reforma juxtaposed with the Porfiriato. Finally, on the far sides are reminders of other unwelcome foreign interventions. The mural ends with Rivera's vision for the future of Mexico, workers pushing past oppression and other nefarious actors to fulfill Karl Marx's vision. Now let's take a quick look at another mural, Man at the Crossroads. Originally commissioned for Rockefeller Center in New York, Rivera's controversial inclusion of Lenin and other communist iconography led to its destruction. Rivera recreated the mural as he envisioned it here in the Palacio de las Bellas Artes.
We are looking at this mural by Diego Rivera. Now, it's in the Palacio de las Bellas Artes in Mexico City, but that was not originally where it was supposed to be. It's by Diego Rivera. So it's called Man, Controller of the Universe, or I've also seen it called Man at a Crossroads. So I guess before I tell you anything else about the mural and the history behind it, I guess I just want to know, like, what are your feelings when you look at this mural?
Well, there's a lot going on. And obviously, I'm immediately drawn to the man at the center at the crossroads with his hand on something. We have like an atom looking thing. I see Trotsky off to the right. And then they're like, yeah, there's war, there's conflict, and there are so many people. Diego Rivera, what does it mean?
Okay, so I'm going to tell you where this mural was originally placed. It was originally placed in Rockefeller Center in New York City, and it was commissioned by Nelson Rockefeller, by like the Rockefeller Foundation, to be like in the entryway of Rockefeller Center. And that was really surprising to me, just based on what I know about Diego Rivera and what I assume about the Rockefellers. What's your reaction to that?
Diego Rivera was like socialist communist in line with, again, Trotsky and Frida Kahlo. Rockefeller is like this family that's from this captain of industry. Like they made so much money, very wealthy, very prominent. It just doesn't seem like those two people would work together.
No, I still haven't gotten to the bottom of exactly, because it seems like he was friendly with the Rockefeller family. We do know that the Rockefeller family, right, they were big patrons of the arts. They were big patrons of like the community. As far as like, you know, mega millionaire titans of industry capitalists go, they were also fairly interested in spreading their wealth around to the community, things that Diego Rivera probably would have liked relative to like, I don't know, Vanderbilt or some other dude. But still, it seems weird It's weird that the Rockefellers are commissioning this mural to go in the middle of Rockefeller Center, like the center of New York and the financial district of the Western world, from Diego Rivera, who it's in the 1930s. Like, it's very clear he's a socialist Trotskyite. Like, we didn't know. Everyone knew.
When they commissioned this mural, did the Rockefellers know what it was going to look like? Or were they just like, we want to support Diego Rivera because he is this very famous artist?
So what they wanted is they wanted a mural that would support progress and science and technology, which was something that both of them could get on the same page about, right? That like we are moving to this new modern Western world. And this is where we want to focus on the guy in the middle, right? He's like a worker. He's at the center of what looks like an atom, right? We're focusing on science and what human beings can do and can achieve.
I forgot how much I liked a lot of things that are in this mural. Like, it takes a long time for your eyes to adjust and see everything that's going on.
Yeah. So what we're focusing on is the guy in the middle, but you see off to the left, you see Zeus. Well, I think it's supposed to be Jupiter, but Jupiter/Zeus throwing a lightning bolt, but his hand's been chopped off, right? This is the end of like old superstition religion, right? Mm-hmm. Which is interesting because Rockefeller was a religious guy, but I think he was very pro progress in technology and science. So they kind of agreed on this. What's going on over to the right, this big statue on the right? What does that seem like to you?
It again seems like some kind of Greek Roman statue, but maybe not of a god, maybe of like some kind of like political figure. And then he or she, he is surrounded by women protesters. And we got Trotsky and we got Marx down there. We got Lenin over off to the side. Wow.
So this is a statue of Julius Caesar, and he's holding a bundle of sticks with the swastika in front, which is an allusion to
the Nazis, fascism
and the Nazis, right? Which again, this is so noteworthy because this mural was made in like 1933. So this is very prescient, if you will, because right, 1933, the Nazis are still, they finally kind of come to power, right? Hitler is now chancellor, but it's still not clear how powerful they're going to become. But clearly Diego Rivera is already saying like, we need to be watching what's going on over there because we thought we ended this sort of authoritarian, almost like medieval absolute power thing, but we're seeing it could rise again if we don't pay attention to the people, the workers, all the people around them, right? Yeah, so they both kind of agreed on this message, right? They agreed on the message of progress, pro kind of Western liberalism, right? Which is a little bit, at least for Rockefeller, it's like capitalism and democracy. For Diego Rivera, it was something slightly different. It was like the workers rising up. It was like capitalism on the road to something else, right? We have to remember that, well, you teach European history. So compared to like what was going on in Europe before with like absolute monarchy and mercantilism and like landed aristocracy, capitalism was super radical.
Yes, because people can take it upon themselves to have and control kind of their own means, own their own private property, make their own wealth, rather than it always being restricted to the people who have elite status. So it is giving wealth from traditional power holds to the people, which is radical.
Yeah, and it's funny because especially a lot of our students, right? When I say that now, they're like they think of capitalism as like the old guard, like way it's been. But at the beginning, right, this is very democratic. It's very pro people. You don't have to be from nobility. You don't have to have inherited wealth. If you have a brain and a good idea, and you can whatever. But to Diego Rivera, that's a step towards socialism, right? It's a step towards then empowering the people and the workers to keep going. So this is where they seem to kind of diverge, Diego Rivera and Rockefeller, because he decided, so they approved this mural. They were like, we love it. He started painting it on the walls of Rockefeller Center. He included all of this stuff, but he thought, I do want to make it really clear that I'm saying that sort of this progress in technology needs to keep going and needs to continue to liberate the people. And so he adds our dude just here off to the right, Lenin. Now, he makes sure that Lenin is not in any of the plans. Lenin's not in any little blueprints that were approved. He's like, I'll just throw him in a little bit later. And what do you think the reaction was?
Not great, because he like led a whole revolution that removed the people who were in power.
Yeah, this is where the Rockefellers are like, well, dude, you can't do that. This is gonna be in the middle of Rockefeller Center, right? And it's not even clear if the Rockefellers themselves were that personally offended, but it was like their brand, right? They're like, we can't have this. Like, this is 1930s. Yeah, we're technically allies with the Soviet Union, but like, really, we're very anti-communist. We've already had one Red Scare. So they go back and forth, and they're like, you have to take Lenin out. You can't have this mural with him in it. Diego Rivera says, over my dead body. And basically, while I don't think he literally says that, but he says, I'm not taking Lenin out. While they're going back and forth, Diego Rivera says, I think they're going to take this mural down. So he tells his assistant, start documenting everything. I want you to take photos of everything we've already done. I want you to keep track of everything we've already done because I think they're going to destroy this mural and I want to remake it somewhere else. And that's exactly what happens, right? So they end up, in 1933, there was a New York City newspaper that attacked the mural as anti-capitalist propaganda. And actually, what's funny about this is that it was already attacked as anti-capitalist propaganda, meaning people were like, we're letting Diego Rivera, the socialist, include all these messages here. And as a rebuttal to that is when he actually added Lenin. So he keeps like doubling down, saying like, well, if you're going to have me make this mural, it's going to be my mural. And so it basically keeps escalating until eventually Nelson Rockefeller demands that he removes Lenin. Diego Rivera says, I will not remove Lenin, but I'll add Abraham Lincoln if you want, which is a funny like counterpart. I don't know. Eventually in 1934, it was covered. And then the workmen, it was going to be covered and like, we're going to figure out what to do with this. But the people that were kind of working on it eventually destroyed it. And so thankfully, Diego Rivera had been keeping track, had been taking photos of his work. This is what's so interesting about murals and public art is that they can be destroyed. You can't easily move them around. And so then he comes back to Mexico City and he says, I'm going to recreate this mural here in the Palacio de las Bellas Artes. The one we're looking at now is the recreation based on his photos and drawings.
Wow.
So he comes back and he makes the mural here. In this mural is where he adds Trotsky. He just like triples down. He's like, fine, you didn't want Lenin. I'm going to have Lenin there. I'm going to have Marx, Engels. And my favorite detail is he includes this guy. Do you see this guy over here with like kind of glasses? He's like sitting at a bar.
Yes.
Okay, that is John D. Rockefeller.
Yes.
Do you know anything about John D. Rockefeller?
He was very against alcohol.
Like he was basically sober his whole life, was very, very big in the temperance movement, donated a ton of money, thought it was this like moral failing. And so on this new creation that he does in Mexico City, Diego Rivera adds John D. Rockefeller, the patriarch of the Rockefeller family, at a bar drinking, surrounded by women like flappers of the 1920s. And right above him floating, this is a petri dish of cells. And the cells, let me make sure I get this right. A dish of syphilis bacteria.
What?
Yeah. So he's like, I'm going to add your dad in drinking, and like hovering above him is going to be a sexually transmitted disease.
This is why you don't mess with artists.
No. And again, it's like, it's just this little nod to, and he incorporates it into the painting perfectly. Most people wouldn't even know what they're looking at. But if you know, if you're Nelson Rockefeller and you look at this, you know, right? And he's saying like, well, this is part of the scientific discovery too, right? I mean, we're discovering cures for diseases. It just so happens that I chose the syphilis bacteria. And it just so happens I put it floating right next to your dad's head while he's hanging around a bunch of loose looking women.
Oh, I love this.
Yeah, so petty. Okay, so the other two things you'd want to look at, right? So anchoring this left panel is that statue of Jupiter, right? This left side of the panel, I believe, is called the frontier of ethical evolution. So it's trying to like focus on moving away from superstition, moving away from kind of like the church and faith, and moving towards, right? We're moving towards the middle, towards like scientific discovery, the power of man, that sort of thing. Then, so on the right side of the panel, this whole right panel is called the frontier of material development. And so the idea is that like we're also now developing things for humans that like the people can take their own power back, right? Back away from superstition and religion over on the left, but also away from like authoritarian leaders on the right. Okay, what else do you notice? What are just elements of this mural as you look at it more that you notice that seem noteworthy?
Well, I think I have a question. If I'm looking at the left-hand side, that is soldiers fighting off into war.
Mm-hmm.
So is he arguing that, like, again, this is where we're coming from and we're not going to do that anymore?
Yeah, it's noteworthy that he's putting them back here as like the war machine, right? And that the contrast to the war machine is a people's parade.
Yeah.
Like the May Day. This is actually like a Soviet May Day parade. He added this after the criticisms about putting Lenin in. So we should see these two as like kind of contrasting each other. Like we have the capitalist war machine being used, but we could also use the power of technology to fuel like the people and a people's.
I love that. Yeah.
Yeah. So in a lot of ways, we want to look at these as mirrors. Like you want to look at like Nelson and a bunch of like wealthy people sitting around drinking, and they're opposite a bunch of thinkers, right? They're opposite like Lenin and a bunch of other kind of philosophers. So we're kind of like looking back and forth, right?
I love that.
Yeah, we can see like back here, like kind of riots and police like subduing a riot over to the left.
Oh,
so
yeah.
He's like hiding a lot of these, right? This was supposed to be like the triumph of capitalism and technology is of course how he pitched it to Rockefeller, but then he's adding in all these images of going like, well, but is capitalism such a triumph, right?
Other things I notice, Darwin, obviously on the left.
Darwin, obviously over here. Yes.
Yeah.
You know what's interesting, and I'm gonna do an interpretation that I'm not sure is right, but this is how art works, is that if we think about Darwin as like the father of evolution, then we'd think about going like from him left to right. And to me, the fact that like the other side of that is Trotsky and Karl Marx is really interesting. Like we've evolved, like we're evolving from this superstition, we're evolving from Darwin's initial ideas all the way over to like the most evolved, which is going to be this multi-gendered, right? Men and women, and like Karl Marx, Trotsky. There's no Stalin in sight, of course, because Diego Rivera, not a fan of Stalin.
I think like what you just said is brilliant, because that is a great interpretation of this, of like, again, if we're looking at the two different sides, look at where we come from, look at where we're going. And yeah, Diego Rivera is like, hey, capitalism caused all these problems over here on this side, but like as we continue to progress as a society, as we continue to evolve as a society, it's going to be people working together to accomplish goals. And it is going to be more equal than what, capitalism has created in the past.
Again, yeah, I agree. And I think seeing this as like Diego Rivera would have seen capitalism as a positive step in the right direction, but not the finish line, is really important here, of saying, yes, like capitalism, Western liberalism, these things did bring us out of these kind of like medieval dark ages, quote unquote, whatever. But be careful because, right, this statue over here is a warning. Like, yeah, we got rid of Julius Caesar, but he's carrying the bundle of sticks of fascism, and it's a clear warning about Hitler. It's a clear warning probably about Stalin too, to some extent, of like, be careful because we're not immune from having these like authoritarian leaders who are going to take over what the people want. So again, this is what I love about murals like this, is that you can read them from like foreground to background. You can read them as mirror images. You can read it from like left to right. There's so many different things to look at. But what's interesting is that if we look at the plants below here, there's something I notice. Like I notice a pineapple. I notice corn. Which those two, I noticed it looks like tomatoes. Those are all like native to the Americas. But obviously there's also wheat. There's some other, at first I was like wondering if these were all plants that were native to the Americas, that were part of that like Columbian exchange. But it looks like they're just like important plants to like fueling the population.
Yeah, I think this is the part of the mural that I think I'm the most confused about.
Oh, great.
Because if we zoom out and see everything, like the rest of it all makes sense. But the fact that it is laying on this bed of agriculture, which obviously like we need to survive, it just seems, I think I'm confused.
Yeah, to me, I think it makes sense of like showing the roots, because again, I think what he's saying is like agriculture and farmers are like the foundation of any civilization.
Yeah.
And we grow from that. But I think what I don't like is that we're not showing any farmers actually farming.
Right.
I think I just don't like that it's just plants, because it seems like everything else is very human focused. And this just seems like, oh, and then just plants happen to be here. Whereas to me, like the true kind of socialist take on it would be like, no, farmers, like in like the earliest scientific innovation was farming. the earliest scientific innovators were farmers. So the fact that it's just showing plants and not anyone actively doing it is the part that bothers me. If I could have one note to Diego Rivera, I'd ask him to add in some actual farmers.
Yeah, excuse me, Diego Rivera. We actually know more than you, so please change this.
Can we mansplain to you for a second? There should be people at the bottom of this.